Okay, I guess we'll get started. Thanks for being here. For those that don't know me, I'm Bruce Wands. I'm chair of the MFA Computer Art Department and the director of New York Digital Salon. Thank you. And tonight we're going to be talking about the Lumen Prize, which is the global award and tour and exhibition for digital art. And I was on the jury of that award panel this year. And so we have a really interesting evening ahead of us. I'm going to do a few brief remarks to get started, kind of to put everything into context. And then we're fortunate to have Carla Rappaport here, who is the founder and director of the Lumen Prize. She'll tell us about what it is and what it plans to do. There is an exhibition up at NYIT that is running this week. It's at 62nd and Broadway. Encourage you to go. And then we have four artists, Lumen artists here. We have Sala Wong and Peter Williams. We have Edward Bateman, and we have Robert Michael Smith. And then at the end, we'll have a very brief question and answer period, and then we're going to have a little reception upstairs on the 10th floor with some refreshments that you're all invited to come to. So what I'm going to talk about is try to squeeze 50 years in about 15 minutes, but I think I can handle it. But anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the history and the curating of digital art, because it is something that is becoming of prime importance now. Digital art is obviously very different from traditional art. Digital techniques are affecting how traditional art is being curated. And if you look back, digital art really has a 50-year history. And it first was looked at as outsider art. It wasn't really accepted by the traditional museum establishment because it didn't fit into painting, drawing, or sculpture. So a bunch of things have happened. There was also a lack of archival capacity for a lot of the early digital art. Operating systems changed, computers went out of date, the paper that a lot of the work was printed on was not archival. Digital photography helped make digital imaging archival. So I want to take you back, and again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the first exhibitions of computer art were done in 1965, which is next year will be 15 years. But the one that was in New York City was Bela Jaluz and Michael Knoll at the Howard Wise Gallery in New York, and it was called Computer Generated Pictures. That same year, George Nies and Frieder Naka did exhibitions in Germany. And this was right at the beginning where most of digital art at that point was line drawings, black lines on white paper. But it was groundbreaking. And the following year, they had a performance art event that was a collaboration of artists and engineers. It was called 9 Evenings, Theater and Engineering. Known people were Billy Kluver, John Cage, and Robert Rauschenberg. It was at the 59th Street Armory. And that was one of the first events of EAT, Experiments in Art and Technology, that was founded by Billy Kluver, Robert Rauschenberg, Fred Waldhauer, and Robert Whitman. And they continued on right through 1998. And there's a tremendous amount of content on the internet about EAT, and you'll hear a lot about it if you look down the road of history. The first really large-scale exhibition was Cybernetic Serendipity at the ICA, Institute of Contemporary Art in London, and that was, 1968 turned out to be a very pivotal year. And that was curated by Yasser Reichart, and there is a site called cyberneticserendipity.net. And that was meant to be a multimedia type of exhibition with art, music, poetry, dance, sculpture, and animation, whereas 9 Evenings was a collaboration between artists and engineers. That same year, the Museum of Modern Art mounted an exhibition, The Machine, a Scene at the End of the Mechanical Age. And that included considered one of the first kind of, I would say, more electronic than digital artists, Ben Lepofsky, who did photographs of oscilloscopes. But Ken Knowlton and Leon Harmon from Bell Labs had a piece in there that's very well known. Billy Kluver and Robert Rauschenberg were in that exhibition as well. 1968 also saw the establishment of Leonardo. And so Leonardo is the International Journal for the Arts, Sciences, and Technology. It is kind of the main publication. It's published by the MIT Press. And now the SIGGRAPH Art Gallery is using it as their catalog. We used it for 8 catalogs for the New York Digital Salon. And another thing that happened in 1968 was establishment of the Computer Arts Society in London. So that was a key year. And you could see that there was a lot of interest internationally because Leonardo was founded in Paris, and we had the exhibition in New York and in London. But that curiosity did not build into momentum. So what happened is that digital art organizations began to be established to support this art form. And now we're kind of jumping ahead to 1979. I'll talk about the history first, and then I'll come back and talk a little bit about what they do. But Ars Electronica was established in Linz, Austria. They are still, it's an annual festival. In 1981, started the SIGGRAPH Art Gallery. And just recently that was, they added the SIGGRAPH Digital Arts Community, which has about 950 members. I'm one of them. And you could be one of them as well. It's open to anyone who works with digital media. And SIGGRAPH also established the Distinguished Artist Award. I was the chair of that committee for the past 3 years. So SIGGRAPH ACM is the Association of Computing Machinery, and SIGGRAPH is Special Interest Group in Graphics. And they also have student volunteers. So those students who you want to get involved and learn and get to meet a lot of these people, just go to the conference and you'll do that. Also in 81, V2, it was originally called the Center for the Unstable Media. It was established in Rotterdam. They are now focusing on art, media, and technology. And in 1989, ZKM, the Center for Art and Media in Karlsruhe, Germany, was established. Now, some of these European organizations are government-sponsored, which really helps quite a bit. And then in '93 is when we started the Salon. And the Salon was started by the New York City chapter of SIGGRAPH in response to the fact that the SIGGRAPH Art Show was not including prints that year. They were just doing a multimedia exhibition. So we did a kind of Salon des Refusés of prints at the New York Art Directors Club. And in 1996, Mark Tribe, who has just recently been appointed chair of our MFA Fine Art Department, established Rhizome, which focused on net art. And the mid-90s was really the heyday of net art. And then in 2011, the Lumen Prize was started by Carla. So you're looking at, a 55-year or 50-year tradition here. I didn't mention everyone. We don't have time, but there are others, such as the Digital Art Museum, DAM.org, D-A-M, the Database of Virtual Art that's established by Oliver Grau, the Boston Cyber Arts Festival. They have a lot of activities focusing on digital artists from Boston. The Victoria and Albert Museum in London is starting a very large collection of digital artwork, and the head of that is Doug Dodds, who's the senior curator for Word and Image at the V&A. He was also a juror for this year's exhibition. There's iBeam in New York. There's ANAT in Australia, the Australian Network for Art and Technology, and there's also SAT in Montreal, which is a Society for Art and Technology. So these organizations continue to promote this art form. You're seeing some museum exhibitions, and it's certainly appearing a lot more in galleries. So again, there are ways that these things work. So now I want to talk about the curatorial models, how this all works. And digital art, and again, I've been with the Salon for 20 years. This is our 21st year now, actually. But there's a hybrid approach to digital art. They use a number of different media to do it. A gallery show is a gallery show. It's in the gallery. And not every gallery show has a website, not every gallery publishes a journal, so on and so forth. And again, the online component is starting to become more and more important for digital art because it's very easy to move most digital art online or documentation of installations. And public events like what we're doing tonight are also really important because I've been a proponent of this art form for a long time, and the job is not finished yet. So if we just go back quickly, Ars Electronica is an annual festival of media art. They have a lab there, a futures lab. They have a media arts center. It's a huge building. They have an archive of every year. They give a prize called Pre-Ars Electronica. And so the Golden Nika is the top prize. But this is a great area of research because it's complete over 30 years. Again, they have state funding to keep it going. SIGGRAPH has developed an archive of their art shows. There's a huge wealth of information about computer graphics. Again, SIGGRAPH ranges from research, computer science, and art. Art is not the main thing of SIGGRAPH. V2s is active as well. They have residencies, and again, they don't run an annual festival, but they are an ongoing supporter of the field. ZKM is a major player in the industry, the art industry, so to speak. And again, they're government sponsored. Isaiah is the Inter-Society for Electronic Arts. They have an annual symposium, and they really try to get an academic discourse going. So Isaiah doesn't really focus specifically on exhibitions. They focus more on the discourse and the academic aspects of it. The Salon, we take a multifaceted approach. We do exhibitions. We don't do as many as we used to. We have an archive. We've archived at least 10 to 12 exhibitions online. We have a lot of public programs, both here and abroad. In fact, I just recently spoke at Oxford University about the history of the Salon. Again, a lot of really serious art history people don't look, anything after, the year 2000 because they don't consider that art history. They look back to the Renaissance or the Romans and Rhizome, again, they have a tremendous online archive, and they are really focused on online work. So again, Rhizome is not an exhibition-producing type of organization. And Lumen, again, has a kind of a unique approach to digital art where there is an online component to it of the exhibition and the artists that are selected by the jury, and then they do exhibitions and public events around the world, and Carla will tell you about that. So, we just went through 50 years in about 5 minutes. Now, a little bit more about the Salon. This is our website, and so our goal here is really a lot about public access and education. We did an exhibition last year, which I'll tell you about in a minute. We do a fair amount of public lectures and public programs. And our last large exhibition was the 20th anniversary, which was the American Algorists, and I'll show you that in a second. And we have one on there called the Abstract Visual Music Project, where we did a 12-hour marathon of abstract visual music over at SVA's Large Theater several years ago. So if you look at, this is the first and kind of the last big catalogs that we did, although we did also do a catalog for the Algorists. But the first digital salon was at the Art Directors Club. We curated it with Autodesk. Software was one of the first exhibitions to be curated on a computer. And we had a tremendous amount of interest in that show. It was originally supposed to be a one-time deal. and it turns out 20 years later it's still alive and well. For the 10th anniversary, what we did there is we had an exhibition at the World Financial Center, and it was the same situation. We couldn't find a museum. It was too big for a gallery. So the people at the World Financial Center wanted to revitalize downtown Manhattan. It was 2003. And there we had an exhibition there. We had an opening with about 400 people. We ran 19 public events in a month. And all the essays from the catalog and descriptions of the artwork are on our website. And this is the catalog for it, which represents one summer of my life. But again, I think it's important to promote this art form. Now, the Salon of Old, we started out with the annual show, which was, the first show was prints, then we started to expand it. And we had interest in Europe, and so it traveled to, mainly to Madrid, the Salon Circulo de Bellas Artes, which is their contemporary art center. There were 1,300 people at the opening, and they had to open extra hours for school tours because it was so novel over there. But we developed a formula for the European art centers. We went to Malaga, Gijón, Barcelona, Milan, Italy, Portugal. We did one in China. It was a little less ambitious. But the way that worked is we had 40 to 45 prints. We had about 10 installations. We had about 10 websites. We had an hour of animation and an hour of digital video. So it kind of covered the spectrum of digital art, and we could fill these large contemporary art centers in Europe, which is important. You can't go into a gallery and not have enough stuff to show. So we did that for quite a while, and it got a little overwhelming and tiring, and we felt we had kind of achieved the purpose. And then our most recent exhibition is The American Algorist. That was curated by Grant Taylor, and it was held in Pennsylvania as well as in our gallery next door. This is the catalog. There are a bunch of catalogs upstairs that you're free to take with you tonight. And again, it was our 20th anniversary celebration. A lot of the work came from the Spalter Digital Art Collection. Ann and Michael Spalter are collectors of digital art. And one of the interesting things was that 3 out of the 4 artists were named as, had the Seagraph Distinguished Artist Award. So the upper left is Manfred Moore, who won 2 years ago. The upper right is Mark Wilson. He taught at SVA from 93 to 95. The bottom left is Jean-Pierre Hébert. He won, actually, Manfred won 3 years ago, Hébert won 2 years ago. And the one on the bottom right is Roman Verosco, who was, I think, the second year honoree. All of these artists write their own software. This is the difference between the pioneers, the people that invented the medium, and the people today. Processing is a very accessible language now. A lot of digital art is used with processing or with the Arduino board or commercially available products that didn't exist. In fact, Casey Rios, who wrote processing, was in the digital salon early on. So this was our last big exhibition. This is the gallery out in Pennsylvania. It had 2 venues. This was at Lebanon, the Susan H. Arnold Gallery in Lebanon Valley College in Annville, PA, which is essentially Pennsylvania Dutch country. So it was mainly a print exhibition, and again, we had that same exhibition here. So that was our last one, and we're probably looking at our 25th anniversary for the next exhibition. So what's the future hold here? Now, I say that digital art will become contemporary art, but that comes with a caveat. It's not that digital art is going to disappear. It's going to become a subset of contemporary art. As traditional art used to be painting, drawing, and sculpture, now it's painting, drawing, sculpture, and media art. And again, a terminology for this has been being kicked around. It used to be new media, but that was like 10 years ago, so it's not new anymore. Computer art is an outdated term, even though we are an MFA in computer art. But we were the first in the country to teach creating with technology and computers with an MFA in the US, and we have about 1,000 graduates. So I can't change the name because I'm going to make a lot of enemies. So we're still called computer art. I prefer the term digital art because I think it's more encompassing. Media art really says that it's all media, and it really isn't. I mean, Robert has a sculpture there that is a sculpture, but it's also digital art. Digital imaging is not, it's different from drawing and painting, but it falls under print media. So, the terms are still kind of sorting themselves out. So what we're going to see as time goes on is that exhibitions and organizations will continue to be in and out of the art network. That, the art space is changing, has changed. It's not only a museum or a gallery anymore. It's a contemporary art center, college galleries, college, venues, public venues. There's a show in San Diego that's done citywide every year. And so, again, there's art on your cell phone, so the aesthetics and the space of art is changing. The online component, again, is going to become extremely important. When I started teaching at SVA, there was no internet here. I started 30 years ago, but they had to dig up 21st Street to put in the T1 line. So it was that archaic at that point. But right now, with the technology we can walk around with, it's really important. And it provides public access and education. And as I was researching, the few moments I spoke here, there's just so much there, and it's increasing at an exponential rate. I wrote my book, Art of the Digital Age, about 8 years ago, and there was probably a fraction of what information online that there is today. And ongoing public events, people are interested, they're curious. Participatory art is a big thing, locative art is a big thing, so that you don't have to go to a gallery or museum to see digital art, but you can go to see that. So on that note, I will say thank you.
Thank you so much, Bruce. It's such a pleasure, honor to be here, to be invited to be here at the SVA for Lumen, to be part of this is really a thrill. Bruce, thank you for inviting us. Trilby, for making us part of your master seminar. Very, very grateful. And thank you, Bruce, for being on our jury panel. Long may that relationship prosper. I have another group in the audience, if you'll let me refrain from starting just for a minute, that I'd like to thank. We're here in New York. Lumen Prize is here with its show in New York with to the good graces and thanks to the NYIT Fine Arts Department. And tonight in the audience we have Professor Ann Apteker, whose idea it was to start a master's program in exhibition and design at NYIT and have Lumen be part of the final project. We have some of the students who created that final project, which I hope you'll come see if you haven't seen it already, up at the auditorium on Broadway. I'd like the students and Ann to please stand up and take a little bow for all their hard work. And at the end of the row, a special thank you, and please stand up for the chair of the Fine Arts Department, our champion in NYIT, Terry Nauheim. Thank you, Terry. It's been so much fun working with you guys. Thanks so much. So what am I doing here? If any of you have had a moment or are curious to look at my past, you'll see that there's nothing in it that has to do with art. I've spent my entire career in journalism. Some people call it the dark arts. I'm a financial journalist by trade. I work for the Financial Times. I work for the Economist Group, Fortune magazine. None of that is artistic, so why am I here? Well, The answer to that story, like all good stories, the answer is my mom, of course. She was bringing me up, my siblings and me up, in the wilds of western Michigan, in the Midwest. I don't know if any of you have been out there. And she was a big city person, and she was counteracted this isolation that she felt by dragging me and my brothers to every cultural event she could find in our small town and around the area. And so from the tiniest age, I learned that art of all forms was what was important. If it was important to her, it was important to me. So I thought, what of the things that she showed me when I was little created the influences that brought me to be thinking about what I'm doing now? And I want to share those, one influence from my very earliest days, and then an influence that more recently prompted me to start thinking about something like Lumen. Does anyone in the room know what the picture in the upper left-hand corner is from? Anyone? Yes? No, that is Diego Rivera, Detroit Industry Cycle. But anyway, thank you for your good guess. That's in the Detroit Institute of Fine Art, and I figure Mom must have taken me there because we didn't have anything to do with Detroit after I was 5. So I must have been 3 or 4 when I was standing at the bottom of those murals looking up there, and I've been thinking about those murals ever since. I went into them, I lived in them, they were another world. I was inside Diego Rivera's mind. I later learned he was a communist. It all got very interesting to me. And in that mural and in that Detroit Institute of Fine Art was born my love of visual art, the immediacy of standing next to genius like that. In the lower right, does anyone know who painted that picture or what it is? Okay, we don't have any, we have a Hockney fan. So in January of 2012, David Hockney did a one-man show in the Royal Academy in London. It was called The Bigger Picture, and I went to it 3 times. In the gallery, he filled the whole museum, but in the gallery there was a room that was dark, completely dark. And in it were iPads. And these were iPad pictures that he had painted. And I found myself standing there explaining to people, yes, those are pictures that were done on an iPad. I had begun to think at that point that I wanted to get out of journalism and I wanted to start something that would promote what I saw as the mixture of art and technology. And when I saw Hockney's exhibit in January 2012, I thought, I'm inspired. There's something out there that's happening with the new wave of technology that might be influencing art and technology. And I found that picture of rural Yorkshire a real influence and made me feel confident that there were artists all around the world. I figured they had to be all around the world doing stuff that might be just as interesting to look at. I wanted to fill my screen. I lived in Wales at the time. I wanted to fill my iMac with pixels cascading in of pictures of this kind of brilliance. So here we go. This is a montage of Lumen 2014. You can see immediately that my hunch was pretty good. They were out there. I had this crazy idea that I could open up a competition. If you had $40, you could enter. You could send me 2 pictures. You could send in 2 pictures, and people like Bruce and others like him might be interested in helping me find the best. And then, because it was digital, we could put it on a USB stick or a hard drive and take it around the world. So that was how the Lumen Prize idea got started. Nobody told me I couldn't do it. And people kept saying, what a great idea. So what I'm going to talk about now is not just the 2014 exhibit. If you'll bear with me, what I'd like to talk about in my I forgot to turn the thing on. In my brief talk is to talk a little bit about the history of the prize and look at some of the early winners and the development. I'd also like to take up where Bruce left off in how the world sees digital art and how the world and the art world classifies digital art, because this is what's exercising my mind now. Why have I put a picture of the Houses of Parliament? I wanted to start by saying that the world until this building was built in 1850 was made up of solid and porous. And solid was buildings like this, which represented art and technology in 1850, and porous was intangibles like love and belief, religion, faith, beauty. But what happened after this is that the world became, with electronics and communications and microwaves and GPS, it became porous. So here's where I'm staying in Brooklyn, thanks to the good graces of a friend who's in this room now. This is a Richard Meyer building, built entirely, almost entirely, I guess, of cement and glass. And when I sit in it, I can see Grand Army Plaza below me. And I think this porous nature is what's influencing the way we're all seeing our art and technology today, which is what's changed. This is the context for me of art and technology now, is the porous nature of our lives. The fact that containment, whether of information or material, concept or emotion, is difficult. And our world, unlike that of our parents or our grandparents, feels porous on every level. And into this, I feel, is a new set of tools that allows the artist to use art and technology to communicate with all of us. Hal Peirce, who's the head of Bell Telephone Labs in 1960, talked about the earliest computer art, the sort of work that Bruce was talking about. And he said in 1960 that, commenting on the mixture of art and technology, artists must learn to use the possible in creating their work, and technologists must reach out for the impossible. So what's changed from when Hal Peirce said that is that the impossible is now in the artist's hand. This phone has as much power as NASA had when it put 2 men on the moon, multiples of power. And this is just an iPhone 5C, nothing fancy. So if those of you who can remember, probably no one in this audience, but the Cray supercomputer, multiples of power from the Cray. And the Cray was what invented those first CGI for Tron in 1982. And even the Cray released in 1990, multiples. So that's what's in an artist's hand today, the impossible. I know what some of you are thinking. This is the privilege of the middle class of the first world. In fact, I use my journalism training to have a little look. By 2017, half of the world will be owning a smartphone. Half of those who have mobile phones will be having smartphones. And a third, that's 1 out of 3 in the planet, will have a smartphone. That's across all countries. It's not just America. So the ubiquitousness of these tools are just flying around the world, and that's what's, I think, causing this new revolution. Okay, why is Van Eyck here? I have heard that he was one of the first users of oil paints, so I had a little look. Hobby Lobby, anyone know what 350 is? That's the number of oil paint colors you can buy from Hobby Lobby. And underneath that number, for next to the iPad 2, a number of colors if you've got the time to find them in the iPad 2. So that's the world that I was just amazed to find out was inside these tools. I'm now going to take you on a little quick trip around the top works of the first 3 years of the Lumen Prize. Let's start with our first winner. And as I go through these, I'm going to be calling up to your mind, how do you classify them? Because I want you to go away and solve this one for me, because it's still a mystery to me how we classify them. Okay, so you see I put up on the top neo-surrealism or photomontage. The contemporary art world would call it photography. Friends of mine have walked into the shows and said, it's photography, not for me. I see it as a mixture of Magritte and Ernst. The picture evokes tension and calm, lightness and weight. It floats, it's tethered. It has so much, it spoke so much to me. This was our first winner, and I'm still falling into that world that the artist created for me. I'm now going to show you the winner of our second year. So if you can bear with me, I'm going to show just a little bit of the clip of this. This is a piece done by a Greek artist who lives in London. It's an animation. These are how she created her metaphors in Cinema 4D, the bus, the destruction of the Greek economy, and then the birds coming into the bus cage to produce a sense of lightness and renewal. Sorry to have to turn it off, but I have a limited amount of time. If you want to see it, please go to the Lumen Prize site. It's beautiful. And I would say, no, that's not animation. It's poetry. It speaks volumes about what she's thinking about emigration and the issues that are facing Greece today. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the geographic spread of the artist. So it's no prizes for guessing that the upper right-hand corner was created by an artist in Quito, Ecuador, and the one in the left-hand side was created by an artist in Tehran. And to me, that kind of sums it up, how artists see their worlds and how they choose to use the modern technology to describe their worlds. By the way, there's no photography in the upper right. That was entirely created on the artist's computer. No prizes for guessing what this artist does in her day job. All right, so she makes video games, and quite a few of the entries are from people in the gaming sector. And again, I just fall into this world. I love it. It is clouds in a city and a magical scape. She creates backdrops for Second Life, and we had quite a few of the people who work in those worlds of gaming enter the prize. This is one of my favorite pieces. It's a still from a time-based work. It's called Glitch Art, and the artist who did it is basically using animated GIFs, and he calls it an organic horror video about the terror of entropy. Again, another world that I could go into, and I love being in it. Now, is it a collage? Is it glitch art? What do we call it? I think when we can sort out some of these nomenclature questions, digital art will seamlessly flow into the contemporary art world that Bruce was talking about. Let's talk about landscapes. One of my favorite landscapes, it's from last year. The artist used rendering, he used 3D, he used all kinds of different kinds of technology, but at the heart, to me, this is a landscape, and I find it very, very almost intoxicating. The shows have changed in the 3 years since we've done them. In this show, there were 38 stills. It was a 50-piece show. We've shortened it now to 25. And of the 28 that qualified this year, only 8 were stills. This is an example of one of the interactive pieces called Murmur. And if you've been to the NYIT show, you'll see it in action, but you speak into it, and your voice turns into that magical expression of light. Is it performance art? Is it a light painting? How do you describe a picture like that? When you've got the answer, please let me know. This one is an interactive piece that uses Kinect, and those little people in the gray t-shirt, that's me 1,000 times. It's just a really engaging piece. I'm playing, it's called Garden of Earthly Delight, and playing on Bosch. Very, very beautiful piece using a lot of MacBook and technology. I'm going to play a piece for you about this one. Again, is it a video game or is it a kind of a gallery for art? Have a quick look at this.
Look closer, Hootie. I might be near.
sorry. Right. I stopped it just because I felt there was a lot still that I'd like you to see. But before I leave that game, I just wanted to say those two that created that game with the Hieronymus Bosch and all that consider themselves graphic designers, not artists. Now that the game is out, they say, they say that gaming is one of the big, growing, fastest forms of video art. So think about that again, that games are also providing video art. Sorry about screwing up on the slides. So where have we got to now? Let me talk a little bit about Lumen. After this show closes, we'll be going to Amsterdam, and we'll be going to, we have a big show in London. We've just closed a show at the Onassis Cultural Center in Athens. We started off these shows in bookshops and not friends' houses, but friends' places. So it's grown, and it's growing fast. I had an email this morning from a private bank in Switzerland that said they had 19,000 square foot building. With that, could we do some digital art? I went, probably, yeah. This is one of my favorite shows, however. This is Lumen's only, at the moment, client, and I hope we'll have more. This is the Financial Conduct Authority of the UK, and it's like the SEC. And if you get called into their lobby, you're probably in trouble if you're in the banking profession. They wanted something calming and soothing, so they installed a video wall, and we curate it. And that is one of the pieces from the 2014 show. And you can see in the corner another piece. They give us a party, and they have drinks, and they think it's wonderful, and we think they're wonderful. And they pay us. So digital art in the public space is becoming a reality, which is a fantastic thing for artists as well as for Lumen. And this is another example of me interacting with digital art in the public space. These people will be our host for our show in January. This is the Amsterdam Art Hotel. It's an art hotel chain across Europe, and they happen to have this interactive curtain. And when they set it up, they didn't realize you have to keep filling it with new art. So luckily we were here to help. And we're working with artists who now curate for this curtain. And hopefully they'll decide that they want one in all of their hotels. And what could be better to have art into places like this? I hope you'll agree. Now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce to you a short video that was created by the winner of the 2014 Lumen Prize. He's called Andy Lomas, and sadly he couldn't be here tonight. He wanted to be, but he couldn't. So he sent over a 5-minute video of talking about his work. And I hope you'll agree that, again, his work, like Neo-Surrealist and the other works that I showed you, glitch, interactive painting, and these new words that we're coming up with, that there will be a word for what Andy does too. I don't have it yet, but I hope that you out there will come up with it and talk to your friends about it and spread the word, because for me, this is just mind-blowingly beautiful. I feel his work, along with the other Lumen works in the past 3 years, have provided an amazing array of ingenuity and, in many cases, brilliance. And I'm absolutely certain that my mother would have loved it all. Thank you.
Cellular forms is the latest stage in a body of work that I've been developing over a number of years called morphogenetic creations. Inspired by Alan Turing, Ernst Haeckel and Darcy Thompson, this work looks at the relationship between growth and form. The aim in cellular forms was to create a richly emergent system for generating very complex organic structures based on morphogenetic processes. The system uses a simplified model of growth by cellular division, taking inspiration from biology, but not trying to emulate any specific organism, and trying to be computationally efficient enough to be run with many millions of cells to create the level of detail that I believe can be biologically convincing rather than just mathematically organised. The project also has aesthetic goals, both for myself and the viewer. I'm interested in exploring the emergent nature of form created by growth systems, and results that may be challenging rather than conventionally beautiful. What unexpected but aesthetically strong results can be achieved? The process is one of emergent exploration rather than directorial control. I'm also interested in the reactions of viewers. I believe there is something deep in human psychology that results in strong reactions to complex organic things. From reactions to the sublime, such as moments of epiphany when viewing the beauty of nature, to disgust and revulsion when faced with disease and decay. What happens when forms are presented in a more abstract manner, not designed to represent any one particular thing in nature, but still retain an almost overwhelming degree of organic complexity? The system I'm using for cellular forms models cells as simple particles that are linked to a set of neighbours. Each simulation starts with the same ball of cells. The system contains rules for when particles are selected for splitting, which are based on accumulated levels of nutrient. When the nutrient level in a cell exceeds a given threshold, it splits, and both the parent and daughter cells are reconnected back to the neighbours. There are forces between the linked cells which create dynamic tensions in the structure, creating motion as it develops over time. By altering the rules for generating nutrient, how cells split, and the forces between cells, a remarkably wide range of different organic structures can be created. One additional force that was added was one that repels cells that are in close proximity but not directly connected. This adds an important constraint that helps induce structural coherency. The presentation is kept deliberately simple, the aim being to show the generated forms with as few biases as possible. I use a number of methods to turn the data into visible artifacts, with each technique highlighting different aspects of the generated forms. Structures are either rendered using an external representation, where cells are shown using spherical primitives that are illuminated with a perfectly diffuse light from all directions, or by using a density accumulation X-ray technique that reveals internal structures that aren't apparent in the surface renders. As well as animations, I also create very high-resolution still images of the final forms. These allow an appreciation of detail in the structures that isn't always apparent when viewing moving images. By contrast, the animations from the simulations reveal dynamic behaviour and what appear to be different phases in the development of the structures as they are grown. A number of emergent behaviours are seen to come from the simulations. These include complex structured folding and coherent pulses of cell growth in waves across the surfaces. Variation in how nutrient is created and how fast it diffuses from one cell to another can also have dramatic effects on the nature of the generated structures. In particular, when nutrient is generated by light, if that light is restricted to only come from above, much more plant-like structures are generated, with the forms bifurcating into complex branches. One of the main things the work tries to explore is why complex organic forms can create such a visceral range of reactions in viewers. Even though all that is being presented are typically arrangements of simple spheres, responses range from comments such as mesmerically beautiful through to terrifying or even disturbing. As I've said, the aim with cellular forms wasn't to directly emulate any specific biological structures, but to create a system with rich emergence. A wide variety of structures are seen, but it is interesting that all appear to have a strong sense of the familiar, with echoes of organic structures that we are commonly used to seeing. This raises questions about the available range of structures that organisms created by processes of growth can take. What constraints as well as opportunities for complex structure does the process of growth impose?
Thank you all for coming. We're really delighted to be here. Thank you, Bruce Swans, for arranging this evening at School of Visual Art, and everybody at the New York Institute of Technology who helped make the exhibition possible as well. The work we're showing at Lumen 2014 is called Conglomerate Distortions Series 1, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and we envision this as an ongoing series of works that we started last summer, summer of 2014, in our travels throughout about a 2-month period. The series was first inspired by a couple of encounters that we had. The first being a piece of equipment that we came across at Indiana University known as the NOAA Science on a Sphere, and it was developed by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association for the purpose of displaying data visualizations in a spherical globe-like form. And I'll show you some images of our work displayed on the Science on a Sphere in a minute. And the other encounter that we had that inspired us was Art Basel, Hong Kong, 2014. We visited this exhibition. It's a major international art fair selling of a very diverse range of work, all within a single venue, and found that very, very overwhelming.
And just additional note to Carlos David Hartley's piece. Actually, Hartley has a salon within the Art Basel Hong Kong, and he displayed 12 of them, and they also out, completely sold out.
Okay, so and from those inspirations, we have obviously collaborating, been engaging in what we're calling a practice of hypertourism, which involves visiting a range of tourist spectacles within a compressed time frame. And again, in this case, it was these three places: Japan, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. And we're using panoptic, omnidirectional cameras that correlate to the Science on the Sphere. So essentially, if you can imagine a camera that makes spherically shaped photographs, and very interestingly includes visual information outside of what we normally think of the camera vision or the framed view. So this is conglomerate distortions displayed in Indiana on the NOAA Science on a Sphere, and very inspired by the possibility of storytelling in the round, so to speak. And the cameras we're using, Sally and I both have exactly the same model of camera. We use the Ricoh Theta 360, which can resolve spherical images virtually instantaneously.
Mm-hmm. They basically do a 360, so they have two lenses, and then we'll be able to do top, bottom, left, and right. Basically, it's recreating the sphere.
And they're not straight, what you would conventionally call straight photography. We do a collage process. It's very interpreted. That's how we think of it as art making through a process of collage and juxtapositions that we make. So this is a little bit of an illustration of how we extract portions. Now we're going to talk about some of our previous work that we see as conglomerate distortions as a step along the way in our progression. We're really, over a longer time frame, we've been interested in researching human interactions within urban structures and using technology to aid us in doing that. But we're very influenced by the French conceptual mid-20th century artist Guy Debord, who engaged in this practice that he called the dérive, the idea of just going into an urban, typically an urban environment, and allowing your immediate senses to be your guide, having really no specific aim or purpose in your wanderings, so to speak, but just kind of developing a new sense of space within the urban environment. Also interested in mapping, the history of mapping spaces is very influential on us. And in a broader sense, expanding the mode of communication above and beyond verbal communication. So we're working in very often places where we don't speak the local language. We're not able to communicate in some of the ways we take for granted through speech. And we conduct interviews. So untranslated interviews, often a huge portion of our content of our work we don't understand it all. We can't translate that. But we expand upon verbal communication using drawings, sounds, studying of migration patterns through public transportation, and memories and the idea of collective memory as well.
And the first collaborative piece that we have, we did It's called Talk the Line. And we picked 3 cities. Prague is the first city that we went to in 2007. And this is our first international residency. The reason that we picked Prague is because we try to find a city that has a special social event, be it, a war or some kind of event that can create collective memories for the citizens. So we're particularly interested in Prague Spring in 1968, how that event changed the perception of our cities and how it inscribed a particularly specific moment to the citizens of that city. So we spent a month in Prague, and then we're doing street interviews for like almost 50 people doing recording, and we also walk around the city recording the sounds of the cities because Prague in 2007 it's already opened, it's already open to the world, and the Soviet Union is already collapsed and everything is changing, and we have a lot of change, and the storefront is all commercialized, and the landscape is really, really different. And then we were able to find a historical photograph of the 1968 Prague Spring event, a group of university students sitting peacefully protesting the invasion of the Warsaw Pact, which was led by the Soviet Union together with 4 other countries. So they were sitting there in the Wenceslas Square, which is a very important landscape and also a very important landmark in the city. And in 2007, when we were there, we were able to go back to the exact site and try to get the same perspective as the historical photograph that you can see right now here. It was still before pre-cell phone. I don't know. Everybody got cell phone. It was still a pre-cell phone era. So what we did is we actually used one of the first generation of this GPS camera, which was produced by Ricoh. It will be able to kind of tag your photograph with a GPS location while you're taking it. So we use that camera, and then we look at GPS at absolute location alongside with images, sounds, commentary of the local people, and the historical documents to reference relative locations. So that's why we want a picture to have in the bottom of the camera. You can see we have the locations, the latitude or longitude of it.
And it might be important to point out that while the image on the left is a still image, the one on the right was produced through sort of the process of stop motion.
Yeah, it's
stayed
like a
in
video.
that space and made hundreds and hundreds of photographs to produce kind of a moving snapshot type image.
And then in the installation is an interactive piece that using sound, because we interview the people and ask them, do you still remember Prague Spring? Does it affect you right now versus back then? The answer reflected between the senior citizens to the younger citizens were different, because the senior citizens still not very much to talk about it, very reserved, and the younger generation, they don't really know very much about it. So this is what we're doing on the street, and that's part of our practices. We really want to reconnect ourselves to the place, to the citizens of that particular place, and then look into some special event that can connect everybody together. And then in the installation, we put together, superimpose the historical photograph with the stop motion video on top of that. And through the interaction is that when the audience came into space, is through sound. When they talk to the microphone, the louder they talk, they will activate and trigger the sound, and also the image of the historical photograph to kind of resurface again to the surface. So it's kind of a suppress and a resurface process through your voice. And then the next series after this, we went to Hong Kong. I was born in Hong Kong actually, so I mean, unlike Peter, I do know the language, but it's really interesting. I do. I still do, but I forgot some of them, but I still do. But unlike Peter, because he didn't really know the language, so it's very interesting working with 2 different perspectives. And I think that's also one of the reasons that kind of inspired us to the very current one for the Lumen Prize. We all have our own camera, wandering around to the similar location and taking photographs, and with a very different perspective. But they kind of also together because the camera basically will do everything in the space. So in Hong Kong, we went there in 2008, which was the 10th anniversary of the British handover. It's a little bit, background of that. Hong Kong is a city that is really, everything is in motion. If you were there a year ago, and then you go there again today, it probably changed already. So that's one thing that we really want to kind of look into, how memories work from 10 years ago to then 2008. We interviewed around 20 people. They are at the age of the mid-30. So 10 years ago, during the handover, they are mid-20. Mid-30 and mid-20. So they are the group that is greatly affected by the handover because they are the group that are looking into not just their own uncertainty after they graduate from college, looking into something very different. They're also facing the uncertainty of the entire city. So this almost become a very important political spectacle for them. And now 10 years later, when they recall the memories, it almost become a non-event. Some of them still remember very clearly, and some just don't quite remember. The question that we want them to answer is, tell them the location where you were, during the handover, and if you remember what happened, exactly what you were doing. And some of them remember very clearly, and some didn't. And I think that is memories, that some are very clear and some are not very clear. So in the installation, we recreate a map of Hong Kong without the actual boundaries, but we put the location back to the location related to our participants back to the map. So the audience from visiting the installation, actually they interact with the shadow. So when they touch the one particular point, it will activate the sound and also the video. The video is on the other side of the on the opposite side of the gallery. So it's a pretty interesting piece that you kind of know where you are, but you're kind of lost as well. All right, and then it took us to the next city on the series, Top the Line, Taiwan in 2010. This piece is actually still in progress because the complexity of the piece, and also because the thing that we try to look into, it turned out to be far beyond we can imagine. But I think that's good because everything is in progress, the same as this media. So we are in particular interested in the relationship, a very tangible relationship between Taiwan and China, especially China's rising global power. So we spent 6 weeks kind of traveling around Taiwan, and in particular, we take a route that a lot of Taiwanese, I don't know whether if anybody from Taiwan here, no? Oh, one, okay. I hope I'm doing the right thing. So we learned a little bit of, it's kind of an interesting practice. A lot of college graduates, and also people that in that particular point of their life, if they want to kind of make a reflection of what they were going to do, and take a break from what they are doing, and then contemplating for the next step, they often will take on a travel around. We call a rite of passage bicycle tour, that they would tour circumnavigating the island. They will go around the island as if they can reconnect. Through that, they can reconnect with the land and the water. So this is a very interesting kind of practice for us. And then we're trying to do it the same thing. We've been traveling. We've been traveling almost across Taiwan at the out boundary, from north to south. And then in particular, while we are traveling, we also interview people along 2 particular locations. One is Taipei in the north, and then one is Kaohsiung in the south. Because the north and south, the citizens have a very, very distinctive political standpoints. One is more into the nationalist party, and one is more into the, we call it the pan-green party. And this is some of the interview we did. We try to talk to as many people as we could and as diverse as we could. You can see, some are more like teenage, and some are more senior citizens. Some are actually a store owner, and then they have different kind of things that they have to like face and worry about in terms of the current relationship between Taiwan and mainland China. And again, the piece is still not yet finished, and we hope that we can return to Taiwan in 2 years and continue working on it.
We definitely think of our works as
Progress.
progressing and projects rather than distinct objects, maybe in that sense. Having begun that project, we had arranged another project, this time a residency in Tokyo in 2011, and we were interested in studying urban space as we have been just kind of continuing that trajectory of research, and very open-ended in terms of going into the project, but wanting to understand this variously unrelated and related forces that influence our everyday lives. So this time we approached or eventually were able to involve the participation of 150 people just through wandering the streets of Tokyo and relying on our immediate senses to get us around. As you may have noticed, we're using different forms of communication in the various cities that we're working in. So here, thinking about the strong visual culture of Japan, we worked with drawing, engaging our participants through drawing, and very, very simple 2 prompts we gave them about lost and found. Tell us what you've lost, make a drawing or sketch or related to what you've lost, and then complementary to that, what you have found, and really trying to be careful about the wording to allow that to be open-ended. Now, while what we found, a very unfortunate circumstance prior to our arrival for the residency was the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in northern Japan in Sendai. And so although we're not imposing, we're going into this as open-ended as we can, we found it a very poignant experience. It was a very traumatic period and an ongoing tragedy in Japan, but really inspired by the way something that can seem very, very simple, a simple lost umbrella or a subway card, can contain very complex emotions and story. So we placed an emphasis on portraiture.
Mm-hmm. And then 2 years later, we returned to do another one called Recurrent, a similar approach with interactive interviews. And here is here's the view of what we are doing, what we've been doing, and also.
Okay, sorry. All right. So again, the video that we're showing is Conglomerate Distortions, and I suppose we've run out of time. We were hoping to show you a little bit and explain it, but thank you for your attendance, and it's playing in the show this year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone, I want to thank, like everyone else, Bruce and Carla for all the hard work that they've put into this, along with so many other people that have helped them. I first had access to digital tools in the early 80s, back when this was proprietary systems. The first one I had access to was called the AVA. It stood for Ampex Video Arts. It cost $250,000, and I think there were under a dozen in the world. So I've been around these tools for so long that I'm probably about 400 years old in computer years on these. So I'm going to show you a few things that go back a little ways. This is an image from the first digital show I ever had. This was in the early 80s. Now, I was frequently asked why I was using these rather clunky, rather inexpressive tools back then. And the answer I developed was that artists have always used technology. In fact, if you think about it, the use of tools, the use of technology, and the creation of art is probably one of the most defining human characteristics that we have. I kind of like the phrase that Danny Hillis said to define technology. He said technology, in fact, I'll say, Danny Hillis at one time invented the world's fastest computer. He said technology is the name of those tools, or that class of tools that don't quite work right yet, which I think anybody that's done much digital art has encountered that before. So this series appeared in a library. It was a place I could get art exhibited. This was a series of works of literature. Tried to choose some of the big texts and reproduced essentially just reproduced the data. So this is the same data that would normally go into, say, a word processing document. This came from the Gutenberg project. Reproduces purely visual information. Now, I found it interesting that people have often thought that technology is objective and agnostic in how it responds to our world. This is an old photograph. Photographs have always fascinated me. This is one that I got from my grandmother. It became part of the first experiment. I asked her, who are these people? Are they relatives? She said, I don't know, must be. And so I kind of wondered at one point, could I take this into the digital world and simulate the entire photographic process? And so, being something of a closet scientist, I built this little test rig that had mirrors and lenses. And one of the things I knew about lenses was they had the ability to reverse an image. So to prove it and try it out, I built this. I ran it as a small experiment. And this kind of inspired my work for a number of years. This is kind of going later into that series. All of my work had lenses and mirrors in it. In fact, part of the artist statement was I've taken the lens out of the image-making process and put it into the image itself. And as David Hockney has come up before, this was probably the early 2000s, about 2002, 2003. He had talked about artists using the hot technology of their day, lenses and mirrors, to produce images. And so I tended to use a lot of images that were possibly inspired by that. So let me go back. We've seen Van Eyck earlier. I think that's pretty cool. At the back of that image is this convex mirror, which was the hot technology of these artists' day. Here's a Caravaggio in the upper right that uses one of those mirrors. There's a Parmigianino in the bottom left that uses one of those mirrors. In fact, he got himself a really great painting gig as a young man by painting a portrait of himself looking into one of these mirrors, and he painted it on a domed piece of wood. So it kind of would simulate the mirror process itself. And so, being something of a scientist, I continued on this for a little while. This is a Dirk Bout's Northern Renaissance picture, A Last Supper. I'm just going to go into a detail. One of the things I was playing with, again, is another form of translation. Can I make old paintings take on the vocabulary of older photographs? Let me get up close to this. The bottom one's the original. The top one is what I did, trying to bring in, lack of color, depth of field, some of the things that we see in photographs to this day. So the bottom is the original, and I noticed that the central figure, kind of a Christ figure, and kind of a Buddy 2 over, had these very egg-shaped faces, which seemed rather strange. So I kind of postulated maybe he looked at himself in one of those same kind of mirrors as a way to save modeling fees, used himself as the subject for these portraits. So the top image was essentially just taking the bottom image, using something as simple as Photoshop, going and doing a negative sphere eyes in it to try to counteract maybe some of that distortion. And it popped into a fairly realistic subject. It bounces off a few art historians I work with, none of which seem to take much interest in my hypothesis. I like taking apart, deconstructing, I guess this is the fancy word I would use, older images. I was really fascinated by, let me hit kind of the original, which most of you recognize. The anamorphic skull in the bottom of this image, which always sort of baffled me. I don't think anybody has a good, solid reason why it's there. It's as though you went to a portrait studio to get a portrait, and some photographer sticks a skull distorted in the bottom, hoping you won't notice on this. So again, I usually take things out, recontextualize them. I'll go back to the original a little bit. So this has all been 3D modeled, constructed. And if you go closer, you'll notice things like the tablecloth is made out of the original painting over and over. I've taken the skull out, incorporated it both in the bottom of the tablecloth. The curtains in the back of the original painting fragmented. You can see little faces coming out. There's iPods, just to show you how old this image is, and devices from the future. These are the objects that cultured people would have known in their day. So I thought I'd better include something that cultured people of our day would have known. And then there's also two strange devices that I presume are devices from the future that we don't know, they don't know, but hopefully maybe in another 20 years we'll all recognize. And I think ultimately I'm keeping some of the same meaning of the original Holbein. The original is called Ambassador, so I imagine these figures as being ambassadors for our ultimate, fate, death that awaits us. I'm always interested in really talking about technology and seeing older technologies interact with newer technologies. This is from a similar time period. Some of you may remember that technology called the floppy disk. This is an interaction between the floppy disk and letterpress printing technology, going all the way back to, we'll say, Gutenberg, which inspired the title for it. This is a book about bookness, essentially. In the covers of these books, in the book boards, which are floppy disks, which were still used in that day, were the real books. This was a collection of, I thought, some of the great world literature put into this text. So this book actually talks about the difference in maybe archival rates. I still have students that think digital means forever. I'm old enough to know that's not the case. Actually, there's been one phrase that, digital lasts 5 years or forever, which comes first. In fact, as I was putting this presentation together, some of those first images I had a hard time bringing up in my laptop because they were saved in Photoshop 2.0 format, which apparently, Adobe CC doesn't particularly like anymore. So going back to another hot technology of its day that tells us the truth, photographs don't lie. This was spirit photography from about the 1860s. A man named Mumler made the first spirit photograph at that time. And because this was following the American Civil War, people looked to technology to let them know about the existence of their departed loved ones. This was very controversial even in its day. There were show trials, P.T. Barnum testifying against Mumler in this trial. Other people, including notable well-respected people, lawyers and judges, swearing that these spirit photographs truly represented their departed loved ones. In fact, Mumler was acquitted in this trial, although his business was essentially ruined. But people were always trying to find some way to get around the unreliability of the human witness. So this technology relied a medium, a human person to raise ghosts of the dead. So I imagine people also looking for new technologies to allow them to basically document that there is life after death. So in this series, which was basically just completed in this past year, I have these inventors, the devices they made, the technologies they use, and these are all 3D modeled, these devices, and the dead that they were able to make manifest. So there's a number of technologies, everything from electricity to sound, in order to have some aspect of the dead to bring back. This was using wax cylinders, so it's a sound-based piece. And I have some of the physical examples of these I can show you later. I'm not sure what technology this was, but one of the things I really get a kick out of is sometimes seeing the fine details to see up close. So I assume that this was the figure's father, since they both have mustaches in this. And this is one of the last ones I'll show you in this series, which I think is kind of interesting because this truly may be a picture of the dead. It was not uncommon to have post-mortem photography. In fact, there were ads that said, as soon as your loved one dies, call the photographer even before the undertaker so you can have the most naturalistic, realistic portrait possible. I'm not sure if this is one or not, because it's pretty common to see supports and stands to help people stay still at this time. But this gentleman's legs don't really seem to be supporting his weight. And if you go closer in it, his eyes are going in opposite directions, and you may recognize this ghostly arm that's there. The thing that I think is cool is, the camera really does let us see the dead once again, not as, pictures of ghosts, but as documents of people that we've loved and cared about. It really is a pretty magic technology. Getting closer to some of my more, we'll say, Lumen work. This is a very early version of what I did. Arthur Danto, kind of a hero of mine, the late art historian and critic, said if you make any kind of object that doesn't seem practical or real or connected with any realistic part of the world, you're likely to assume that it's art, because what else could it be? So I found in the computer I could 3D generate shapes that had no resemblance to anything I'd ever seen. So when I would try to put them into a context, they would generally come about or come to look like an object of sculpture. So I had to kind of play with it. I found if I made the landscape a little bit more abstract, that sort of helped. I tried making them into more realistic, natural objects, as though they were trying to communicate to us through strange messages in informal forms. But because I'm really interested in history, that's something that happens as you get older. You have more history yourself and become more interested in what came before. I ran across the images of Karl Blossfeld that would document strange organic shapes. This was about the turn of the previous century, and he made his own camera to be able to do this. And so that kind of inspired me to work with this. And one of the things I noticed about organic life forms is that they're all made out of their own environment. So the backdrop of these and the texture that's wrapped on these are all from the same source, places that I hike, places that I inhabit. And one thing I think has come up tonight, that biology and genetic manipulation is becoming a strong metaphor, because we're doing it both in the virtual world and we're doing it in the physical world. And so this generated a series of images that I've been calling 5 anomalies that talk about just our ability to put jellyfish genes into rabbits to make them glow, make genetically modified food. We can make essentially totally virtual worlds, both physically and digitally. So this is sort of the Lumen piece. So the texture you see around that's the same texture you're seeing made for its own environment. If I zoom in a little bit closer on a few of these, you can kind of start to see some of the landscape that forms these, trees, mountains, snow on the mountains, and sky. So I'll just go through some of these kind of quick. I still like the real world and some of those technologies, even though it's pretty sloppy and hard to predict. I kind of like the digital realm because it lets me be a total control freak. But I really love and crave and miss some of the more traditional processes. So even though I'll use digital, I'll go back into older technologies. This is 19th century technology of tin types. I had some plates that I was doing of the ghosts, essentially going full circle. And I decided, because I knew a few were kind of flawed, and I kind of liked the flaws, I'd take the whole process full circle. Because one of the things I like about chemical processes, they had the ability to surprise me and let me see things that I'd never imagined before, which is something that digital also has in common. So thank you very much.
Good evening. I've been in this business for a while, maybe even too long. In '76, I met Steve Jobs when I was a graduate student at San Jose State, a sculptor. And while he and Wozniak were putting together the first personal computer in a track house garage in Cupertino, I was 2 miles away in Los Gatos in a track house garage putting together my first sculptures. We had some friends in common, and he told me about this amazing world that he was going to make happen. And I just said, well, this sounds cool. But I don't want to run companies, and I don't want to write software. And he goes, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'm an artist. And he went on about how this is really the future. And then he started pointing out the first Star Wars that had just come out and had the TIE fighter scene in it. And you're going to be able to do that at home in your own computer. It was a pretty phenomenal thing. Now, I'm going to make a huge leap right over the top of about 25 years of digital art and traditional metal casting work that I had done. Because the piece that was selected, and there's only 20 minutes, The piece was selected as this one that's on the table in the foreground here, which this past summer I just had carved at about this scale in Tuscan Carrara marble with a 7-axis robot. I've had this fortune of being able to play with a lot of new technologies for quite a long time. Now, this is the only metal sculpture that I'm going to show, even though I have a larger history of metal work. This is a stainless steel piece. And this shot is in the gallery that I was the director of in Beijing between 2010 and 2012. While I was also keeping my day job at NYIT going here, while I was also administering 3 campuses in the Middle East in computer graphics and having a career as an artist. On all of this kind of multiple personalities really are also were made possible by the computer. So it's not just that my art is made by the computer, all my communication, just like all of you, all of our communications, all of my outreach, but even my reputation as an artist really exploded in the early 90s because of the internet. Oh. Sorry, I have a tendency to like just project it out if anybody has any trouble hearing me. This shot was the studio that I had in Dumbo in 2003. And the 3 sculptures on the pedestals are the first marble sculptures that were carved directly by a CNC machine. I was one of the founding directors of the Digital Stone Project after Seward Johnson sold off the stone division from Johnson Atelier. A group of sculptors who wanted to keep this technology going. We found ourselves after a while not administering an art organization like we wanted to. We were running a company, which was the last thing I ever wanted to do. And so we sold it off. It's now owned by Jeff Koons, if that might resonate. But you can see also there's a print in the background, and this is a digital print on canvas. But the image, just much like our last speaker, is generated by the same information that's generating the sculptures. And it's from an animation. And it was also something that then became something that was projected onto the internet. And then on the wall in the background, you see that there's a shelf of all kinds of small, rapid prototype pieces. So I was very fortunate to be able to start working with 3D printing over 15 years ago, long before it's become the hip thing. This is a close-up of one of those sculptures in pink marble. Now this piece was carved entirely on a CNC lathe at the Johnson Atelier. And here's the same file then used to make a much larger piece that was CNC cut in foam and with a polyurethane skin sprayed on it. And here it's been in its resting place for the last 8 years in front of the public library in White Plains, New York. And so it's at 6 feet. The marble piece is at 2 feet. This is at 6 feet. Another one of that early series that was cut in foam at 6 feet, polyurethane skin. This piece has been exhibited in many, many locations. This is Governor's Island several years ago. It's now sitting on my property in California. My resting place waiting for me is turning into my sculpture garden. And if you have a chance to go up to Columbus Circle and you're near New York Institute of Technology, in the window of the library, you'll see 2 granite sculptures. This is a China black granite, and the piece is called Gynophlorosiraptor. And the names reflect the kind of fusion of visual language that go. These pieces are not generated by math art. These are generated more as a kind of an internal alchemy. As I go around the world, I see the world, I see everything that makes up the world, I think about the world. and I coalesce these and create these sort of philosopher stones, and quintessentially deconstructing the world to make these sort of objects that are really meant to do what philosopher stones in China are meant to do, which are artifacts of contemplation. But instead of coming from nature, they're coming from my internal nature. This is the other piece that's in that window. This is a white granite piece. Red granite. Now, these last granite pieces were all carved in China. And despite the fact that I was on the board of directors of at the time, one of the only CNC stone sculpture milling companies in the world, I couldn't even afford my own product. So I went to China and found that I could bring my rapid prototype pieces, so I still was working with the digital files. I was making a digital print, but I was going and working with traditional craftsmen. And I found this actually to be one of the best processes to work, and especially when I could find some good craftsmen. I also started realizing here I was working with robots, but in fact robots have always existed. They're called human beings, and they're electrochemical organic computers that have lots of digital qualities to them, and they're capable of reproducing anything. How did Bernini transform Rome? He had 1,000 of the best craftsmen in the world working for him, and he was a stage set designer. You know, my God, you know, he was in seventh heaven. So I've sort of been happy to be kind of a postmodern Bernini, moving between organic robots and mechanical robots. I was very fortunate in 2008 to be part of a large project that Autodesk funded in China. It went to 4 major cities in China: Beijing Today Art Museum, Shanghai Dolong Museum of Modern Art, the Chongqing Gensa Gallery, and in Wenzhou, a hotel conference center. So this is in the center of Chongqing, a city with 33 million people. And this 6-foot granite piece is sitting there with the Yangtze River right behind it. Actually, this is where the Yangtze and the Jiaoliang rivers come together. It's a very special place in the center of China. This was when the Japanese invaded China. They moved the government away from Nanjing to Chongqing. And because it was a mountain city, they could hide away from the Japanese Air Force. This particular piece was eventually purchased by the China National Museum, and it's in the permanent collection in Beijing, China now. This is a hutong in Shanghai, a very old but gentrified hutong. This piece is by Labia by Odalisque. It's my homage to Henry Moore. It's a sort of a cyber Henry Moore, but it's also an homage to the theme of the odalisque, the exotic reclining nude. This was also one of the pieces. I had 5 pieces in there. The other artists were Bruce Beasley, Kenneth Snelson, and John Isherwood. We had 5 sculptures each. This is Chow Tao Quanta Mandala, again, which is a fusion of the location. I was on a residency at Chautauqua, which is a well-known artist residency, and I was a guest instructor in sculpture in 2007 when I designed this piece. I've been snorkeling and scuba diving for decades, and so it's not a surprise that a lot of this sort of filtering of the world also are things that I see in the sea, which again reflect the world around me and reflect the symbols of imagery that relate to humans and also an awful lot of genitalia, if you haven't noticed yet. That's the Jungian Freudian part of the alchemy that gets melted into the pieces. And of course, these things come from animations. And you know, a storyboard is breaking up time over a series of frames. But if you piece all those frames together and you fuse them, then suddenly you have a static piece of sculpture, which is in fact the movement of time itself. Baccioni's work as a futurist in sculpture, he started doing this kind of thing. The cyber tools allow this to a great deal. And if you weren't sure that there was any genitalia in my work, this actually came from seeing a drawing by Picasso in which he was clearly trying to fuse what he was trying to make a quintessential woman. And yet the thing had wings. And I thought this was not a piece that most people know about because it's a very tiny little line drawing. I just happened to see it in the Met. And it became the beginning of a large body of work that I did after that. And this piece is carved in a marble while I was working with craftsmen in Vietnam. So I not only worked in China, I worked in Vietnam, and you'll see some pieces. I also worked in Cambodia at Angkor Wat. This piece, when I was following the show, I got a sabbatical in 2008 to 2009, and I went to China. And of course, I was still producing work because part of the exhibition is that we had a rapid prototype machine going with us. So I was able to keep generating new work for the show, which felt to me like the most intelligent way to have an exhibition, that you just keep making new work and keep adding to the show as you move. This piece was also carved, and even though it was designed in China, it was actually carved by artisans in Da Nang, which was on the DMZ during the war, which was, I almost got an invitation by the US government back in the day, and I was much happier to go visit the country years later as an artist. This is the stone yards. This is the Cave Focaccia at the top of the Carrara Mountains. And this is where the stone for our robots in Italy, in fact, our robots are located just a half an hour drive down the hill from this quarry. And these quarries, pretty much except for the modern industrial equipment, would have been recognized by Michelangelo. In fact, he worked up in these mountains and pulled a lot of his stones. What Michelangelo would have loved to have had is one of these. And this is the 7-axis robot. And this is the sculpture that I produced in the first year. That's 2 years ago. And it's on exhibit in a fortezza in the top of the Garfagnana region. And now I'm going to show the making of this piece in granite. So this piece starts as a digital file. Here it's in a MakerBot format, which we use to make a 3D print. Now the 3D print you see down below here is below the rough carving of the sculpture. The print isn't necessary for the computer. We go straight from the original file to the large sculpture. But I have to go do all the finishing work afterwards. I need the model to refer to as I'm going and doing the final handwork. The robot actually only does about 90 to 95% of the work. That last 5 to 10% takes me a solid month. So this is pretty much what it looks like when it comes off the machine. And you can see there's some lines in the detail here. You can see there's actually a lot more work there than you might imagine, because I really have some very tight lines in this piece. And I have to go in there with small hand tools, small Dremel tools. It's a mix of power and hand tools. I actually did most of it with rasps that Michelangelo would have also worked with, rasps that were identical to what I was using. This is the Museum of Science of Sculpture and Architecture in Pietrasanta, Italy, which is at the bottom of the mountains right on the coastline. And this has been, as a young artist, sculptor straight out of graduate school, I lived there for a year, and I went back and forth over the years. We actually were talking about using robots as early as 1982, but it was just a conversation over in a bar on the piazza. But now it's our reality. And now I have conversations with people who are running the town to bring this stuff back. This is the exhibition. You can see it's a mix of the pieces that were produced by all the artists, and that was all produced in 1 month by 20 different artists. And then there are projections of earlier works and also the digital files behind. A very proud papa with his new baby. Thank you.